Good afternoon, everybody. Hope you're doing well here today. Hope we don't have any fires to put out, but if we do, we have the Executive State Director for the Fire Association sitting right across from me. Joe Palmer, how you doing today?
Wonderful, Ms. Ann. Thank you for having me over today.
Absolutely. You know, it's very interesting because we met up there in Joe Wilson's office in Washington, D.C. when I was up there doing an immigration radio row, and you were up there making the rounds with a group of firefighters, and I said, what are you guys doing here?
And it was interesting that when our paths crossed, we found out we had this commonality of Greenwood in our past and everything. So that worked out really nice. Thank you for having me over and kind of continuing that conversation.
Absolutely. Well, you know, I think we take firefighters for granted all the time. We expect they'll be there when we need them. And of course, in today's world, we're using a lot more of our fire trucks in the emergency medicine aspect of it. They found that, I find it hard to believe that that's actually a good thing, but it's hard for me to look at when we see those big fire trucks going around town, but that's what happens, doesn't it?
You've got a high service demand and you're trying to maximize the people that you're actually using in your community. And so typically a lot of communities have chosen to enact those fire apparatus and those individuals to respond to those calls, and it's worked as a pretty good model.
Right, but it still seems, does seem kind of hard to believe, but it sure works. And of course, the emergency medical transportation people come in right after that so that
Absolutely.
They can be there.
I think what's important is any community has to find a way to get the emergency responder to a scene or to your call for services as quickly as possible. Whatever that model may be is probably best, but this community has researched and found it equitable that they can respond to those individuals with a fire engine and be supplemented by that emergency medical group, and so it's a good working model. A lot of places use it.
Absolutely. Well, you know, I understand that you're originally right here from Greenwood. You went to Lander. What were you majoring in when you went to Lander?
Majored in biology.
And what are you doing today?
Right. That is the natural follow-up question of what's the match there?
Right.
I liked science. I liked the biology side of it. I don't know that I was really all that good at it, but I was intrigued by it and enjoyed it. It just, I guess, kind of came easy in comparison to other topics that I took. But Lander's a great school. I had a great time over there, maybe too great of a time, I don't know, but it was a good school.
You weren't back there when they were Lander Lilies, were you?
You know, everybody says that, and I say, no, missed it by a couple of years. Unfortunately for me, missed it by a few years.
But how did you get into firefighting to begin with?
You know, I was living here in Greenwood, living out in Carnaca, and I had several people from the community ask me about coming and joining the volunteer system there in Carnaca, and I did that, and the rest is history. It just was by invitation, and immediately I was hooked.
What hooked you?
Probably you think about a teenager now. This was an 18-year-old is probably excited by the ability to be able to respond, to be able to serve the community, to go to all of those things that you hear on radio that are being talked about while I was there. So I think initially it was probably that excitement, and then after that it became really the ability to be able to do something positive, to see an immediate result of some physical and mental activity that you'd had that the average person really couldn't do.
You know, we think about firefighters and we think about the danger that they put themselves in. I think about the group out there, what was it, in Arizona, that were covering themselves up with the fire protectant and still lost their lives. It's a very dangerous thing.
The wildland community has been taking a pretty rough beating of late, and here in Washington State just this past week, and it's an unfortunate reality that those calls are so unpredictable because of the variance in nature, wind, humidity, shifts from morning to afternoon. It's a lot of variables, and when you give it that unusual terrain that you find out west, it just makes it that all more unpredictable and hard to communicate what that fire is going to be doing that quick. And so our hearts go out to those individuals that have lost lives of recent out there. But whether it's the Prescott, Arizona example, or whether it's, like I said, more recently here in Washington.
I actually heard of a businessman that went out and bought his own fire truck and put together his own group of firefighters. I mean, talk about being motivated to do something for the community.
The epitome of the American spirit, the epitome of volunteerism, and just your community has a need, their call was there, and somebody went into action. I think it's great.
It is, but still, there's a lot of training that goes into having to be a firefighter.
Absolutely it is. There's a lot of time that goes into giving an individual the level of comfort and experience that's required to be able to make a lot of the decisions in split second that's required, and so that mandates a lot of training time that those individuals have to go through.
Sure. So in our area, now of course we're looking at South Carolina because you are the executive state director for the Fire Association. What are some of the issues that are facing our state first? What are we facing in our state levels?
Probably the biggest concern that the Lakelands community, Greenwood, the state, and really even the nation is faced with right now is the declining number of volunteers. You were just talking about this gentleman in Washington State bringing his own truck. We have a very severe declining population of volunteers that are lessening daily, that we're all having to confront and deal with, because at the fundamental level for fire suppression, for emergency response, is the human, is that ability of that individual to serve. And without that, it definitely impacts the ability to provide that service to the community.
Why is it getting more difficult to get volunteers?
Demands for time. I think it's a reflection probably of the larger socioeconomic things that are going on all around us. Demands of family, which family should be first. Demands of your church, which should be certainly in there. Whether your business community is either local or you're working somewhere on a shift out of town, on and on and on. Whether it's a civic organization, again, I referenced the churches, groups around town, I think it's probably reflected that we're all experiencing those same types of problems with those volunteer numbers. So just the demands on time and the things that are being pulled in one way or another just impacts the ability of an individual to commit the amount of time that's required to train and to be on standby, be prepared to go to a call when it happens.
Sure. And you never know when that call is going to come in.
Absolutely, and that's stressful. Being able to be ready at a moment's notice and be able to tell your family and explain to them, hey, I know you're sitting down for supper, but I've got to go to another response, another call, whatever it may be, and that's hard.
Sure. Now, of course, here in Greenwood, we have the city has their own fire department, and that is paid for. And then all around that is the county, which is a volunteer department.
You're blessed in this community of having an outstanding city service, of which I had the pleasure of being able to work for, and can say that beyond compare, they are a great group of people that are very competent in what they do. And you're surrounded by a lot of very passionate, competent, capable individuals that complement the things that are not in that incorporated area. You're very fortunate to have those two services that do work together and understand each other very well and mutually operate. So you're lucky here in Greenwood with that model.
Sure. But it still is, there's a difference between the city and the county. Now, when you look at response times and this type of thing, how does it stack up, Joe?
You've identified it right off the bat, that you've got the same type of equipment, you've got the same competent individuals that are taking the same training class. What really you're talking about is a lot to do with response time, because if I'm in my home or it's at night, I've got to go to a station and pick up a piece of equipment and then come to your home, and that expanded minutes makes all the difference in what you can save as far as property and can save as far as lives. And that's at the core of where we are. It really has nothing to do with the competency or professionalism of the individuals. It's just really the reality of your staffing that you've got available to respond at a moment's notice.
And of course they don't stay overnight. Like, you know, it's not like that. It's get dressed and rush out the door.
That's correct. And that role, that model, that system has worked for hundreds of years in this country, not just in this community. But it's challenged now because, as you and I were just talking about, all those other things that are pulling on individuals, and so it's very difficult to maintain that service level requirement that the community is expecting, demanding, if that's the right word. It's a very hard balance.
Absolutely. Well, I am here with Joe Palmer. We're going to be talking firefighters. We're going to be talking some of the challenges. We're going to be talking some of the good, the bad, and the ugly, and how can we adapt in today's world to make it more usable. Do you know there's a 70-30 model? 30% get paid, 70% volunteer. We seem to have a deficit, but this isn't the only organization that is having this problem. So we're going to talk about that. Hey, don't you go away. We'll be right back. that's right. We're right back here, Sharp Facets Gallery. Yes, I'm Ann Eller. Yes, I am right here with Joe Palmer. He is the Executive State Director for the Fire Association. So I'm right here at the top of the heap, aren't I?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not sure how good or bad that is, but there we have it.
We think about firefighters and we think, how do you get more people involved? Are there any good benefits for being a firefighter? I mean, we seem to be all about the benefits today.
Right. And that is a constant challenge that we at an association and the management at a local level has, is to provide some kind of incentives which would entice individuals to come and either work there as a profession or to volunteer there in those types of systems. So we spend a great deal of time trying to find those things, as you and I saw at the federal level, whether there's some tax incentives or rollbacks that can occur. At the state level, there are tax incentives for property income tax, levels. Then at a local level, you're trying to find those things that are really oftentimes more of a point of personal pride, of recognition, because fundamentally there's not a lot outside of just what the typical employer-employee relationship would be.
Right. And I know that, it's hard to get, I've been talking to, I was at a event where Police Chief Brooks was talking about how difficult it is to get people, and they're paying them, albeit it's not a big pay scale, but getting people to be police officers in the sheriff's department, and I would presume that the firefighters kind of fall in that same type of group.
You're more adept at media than I am by far, but the stigma that you receive, both good and bad at times, kind of affects your ability to be able to recruit and retain individuals. And right now it's a pretty tough time to be in public safety. I mean, there's a lot of scrutiny, be it though probably warranted, that exists, that people are just a little afraid to take those steps to do, whether that's law enforcement or fire. And so recruitment right now of good people is very difficult. There's a lot of competition amongst other professions to be able to pull those talented individuals in. I think that one of the things that a good community has to do when they're talking about recruitment is to look within the community to be able to mirror the aspects of the community and its recruitment activities. Paid or volunteer, it's regardless of the type of system, to be able to look from within that community and recruit the demographics that you have, regardless again of sex or age or of race. Those successful systems have found a way to be able to do that, retain those individuals and entice those individuals to come in for community pride reasons or monetary reasons as they may be. I think Greenwood's pretty successful at that. I think that we all have challenges, but I think that in general the Lakelands community has a good feel for what those demographics are and tries to recruit those.
Now, what about women as firefighters? Yeah. I mean, I think I met one woman who was a firefighter, and if I remember correctly, she told me she had a tough time because they didn't want her doing some of the things.
And that would be terribly unfortunate if that was the sentiment, because I think that it should be, again, based on the merits of the individual to be able to perform the position, regardless of what that person is, what it looks like.
I mean, she was a little person, and I think they were concerned about the big hoses or something.
Being concerned, I think, is a legitimate thing, but I've been able to overcome many hurdles through training, through both physical training as well as the cognitive and manipulative training of individuals. A lot of those things can be overcome. So if the person has the willing heart and willing mind, no matter who they are, they can do the job.
Sure. But are there many women firefighters?
No. There are not very many at all. And I think that's just, again, an unfortunate traditional view of the profession, is that it's been very predominantly populated by white males, and typically younger white males. And that's terribly unfortunate, because
is that because they can go da 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 and go running in to save the day?
And there may be that machismo type thing that exists there, but unfortunately that's a lot of that's false. I think that a lot of what the profession brings is a mentality, is a competency level, is a preparedness level that anyone can do. It's not just, should not be just dominated by one particular sex or the other.
Yeah. I know back in the day, kids grew up wanting to be police officers and firefighters, and it wasn't computers and that type of thing, but that is what were the respected professions.
And I think it still is. I'm biased in that perspective, but I think that it still is, and I think that we have to capitalize on that, ensuring our image, ensuring our integrity, ensuring that the individuals that are doing the job now are living up to that view that those children may have, ensuring that we do the right thing. I think you're able to continue to be able to recruit those persons that want to live up to a model. I mean, there's always people looking to associate themselves with some group, whether that's fraternal or whether that's social. well, this is a good group to be associated with, the public safety community in general, because put aside bad press moments, this is really a job of integrity, of great service. And we were talking about what brings people in. What brings people in is that desire to have that level of pride in the service of what they do.
And not only that, I mean, just from a personal protection, if you are a firefighter in your community area, you're helping to protect not only your own home, but those close to you. And as we've seen out on the West Coast, what can happen with a fire that gets out of control.
It's pretty important that people look outside of themselves and have a shared responsibility for not only their lives, but the community's wellness and the wellness of the population around them. And that's always been the way in this country and in the way in this area. And I think that a reflection of that, a pause to kind of think about exactly what you've described, is probably key in being able to motivate individuals that want to serve. And there's not really a lot of pay incentive to be able to do that. It's just that thing, you're giving back, you're helping. There's going to come that time in your life or in your family's life that you're going to need that help. Why not pay it forward?
Sure. Well, we always talk about in neighborhoods, a nosy neighbor is a good neighbor, because they may be able to tell you when somebody's been in your backyard that shouldn't have been in your backyard, or coming out with the TV out of your house.
Community watch programs are a good example, and I think that there's probably a lot of community risk reduction efforts out there, even on the fire side, that mirror that same concept. It's not so much I'm trying to mind your business, and you say that in jest, but it really is me taking some expertise that I may have and offering it to you to limit your risk, whatever that may be, and in turn saving the taxpayers and saving the community.
Sure. Now, of course, we talked about here in Greenwood, the city has a firefighter, it has paid firefighters, but outside the city, the county doesn't. Now, is there a trend towards going more towards paid firefighters?
I call it an evolution so much as a trend. Is you can study a lot of different suppression systems throughout the state and see a natural progression from an all-volunteer system into an all-paid. Now, that's not because of any group is any less valuable or any less important or any less competent. It has nothing to do with that. It really has to do with service demands. And as service demands rise, sometimes they can overcome the volunteer population for what it's able to provide, and therefore there's that transition phase into some paid system. That transition can take the shape and appearance of a myriad of different examples. But where that evolution oftentimes can stop is when you have a community-supported volunteer system that has a lot of activity from a lot of different walks of life in that community to support that volunteer system. A lot of times that evolution will stop at that point, or at least retain that point for some period of time until that service demand starts to go up again.
Now, what about the effect of having like in our area, we are having a large retirement community, people moving into the area. Does that change how people perceive volunteering?
I hope that it would. Now, I'm going to tell you why I say that. I think that, again, that department, that system has to reflect the community in which it is serving. And immediately you start saying, well, that retired population isn't going to be the ones on the end of that line going in a burning structure to fight. Well, I've known a lot of people that were older than I am, that are more physically capable than I am, that can perform that work, but also more fundamentally, inside of that fire system, a successful fire system, is home for a lot of different people, is the ability for those individuals with a skill set other than just being able to fight fire to come in and participate in support role functions, apparatus operating, department management, training, records keeping, A to Z. And a good system is one that finds a home for those individuals. So retiring population really wouldn't scare me all that much. The question is my system ability to adapt to that population and bring those people in? How successful are we going to be? Now, there are those times when just simply the community is not interested in that, and here we go on that evolutionary track again. It's typically then you're going to be back on that track of trying to bring in paid people to supplant what the volunteer systems can do.
Well, we got a lot to talk about.
Yes,
we do. And of course, there are some Explorer Junior Firefighter programs we're going to talk about. We are going to be talking about some of the things that firefighters have to deal with, PTSD. Did you ever think that firefighters had PTSD? So we're going to talk about all of these type of things. I certainly hope you're going to stay right here. If you have a question for Joe, give us a call, 229-7984. That's 229-7984. We'll be back after the news.
Are you a pirate or a pack rat? Do you have a vacation of a lifetime sitting in the attic? or a college tuition hung on a wall, or is a fabulous retirement hidden in your jewelry box? Bring those items to Sharp Facets Gallery. We can establish value and buy from you or sell for you. And so ends another chapter at Sharp Facets Gallery, 72 Bypass, and on the web, sharpfacets.com.
Oh, that's right. We are right back here, Sharp Facets Gallery this afternoon. It's kind of a hot one out there today, but we're staying nice and cool here. And I have the executive director for the State Fire Association right here with me, Joe Palmer. He's from down there in Newberry, and we've been talking about a lot of interesting parts of being a firefighter. But you know, we call you guys firefighters, but how often do you actually fight fires?
Absolutely. The actual fire suppression amount of time that individuals spend is pretty small. The greater amount of time that the individual has is spent in preparing themselves physically, mentally, for the actual cause to occur. So the greater amount of time is in that preparation as opposed to the actual response. And
you know, today, do we have less fires than we did in the past?
Or I think we do, and I think that stats bear out the fact that we have fewer fires. Now, I'm not sure that the severity has changed all that much because we still have some pretty large conflagrations, some pretty large fires, but I think the number of that is improving because of the awareness of the homeowner and the ability to do inspections at pre-construction type things, as well as maintenance inspections, as you feel here when you go through. Those types of preventative measures keep the rate of occurrence at a low level, but they still occur, and when they do occur, because of the content loading in most houses, the fires are more severe. We're putting stuff in our homes nowadays that burns at a lot higher temperature and a lot faster than we did 10, 20, 30, 40 plus years ago. And that makes a substantial difference in the work that's actually conducted once a fireman arrives on the scene of whatever your emergency is. So numerically, maybe less, but the actual severity is, I think, on the increase.
Yeah. So when we talk about fires, one of the things that we were talking about is, our local firefighters come out here every year, and we have to go through a fire inspection to make sure that our electrical outlets and our exit signs and all this kind of stuff are in good shape. That's one part of it. But then I always find it very interesting because the guys bring the fire truck out and they come in mass and they come inspect and see where the breakers are, make sure that they understand the map of the building. So that's another thing that they do as paid firefighters. What about outside of the firefighting, paid firefighters in the counties?
The concept you're speaking of is not so much just an inspection as it is a pre-plan of the facility that they're looking at. And pretty much any service delivery system, volunteer or paid, will do pre-plans of a facility. And what that does is that gives the individuals who would be first responders here to this building the opportunity to see what's inside, to see what they're encountering, to learn and prevent any surprises that may catch them when the actual fire occurs. And that happens in the city of Greenwood as well as in the county as well. And I think that the frequency of those is probably a difference because, again, you're talking about a volunteer individual versus someone that I can say, okay, today on shift, here's what you're going to do. But fundamentally, the concept is we're putting individuals in a building to be able to not only help you prevent an incident, but also if something happens, those individuals know a little bit more about your building. You identified some of the things that they're looking for. But fundamentally,
very familiar.
Oh,
very familiar. Been doing this for years.
There you go. and what it's done is it prevent from some large loss of property from occurring, and so it's a valuable asset. I think how it's used and how it's portrayed is important. If it's portrayed as a negative, hey, here they come again to make me do something, or versus an education with you is here's what we're talking about. If it's that exit sign that's over our shoulder, why do we want that light working? And explain that and work through that with you. It's not punitive, it's really preventative. And if you come up with that perspective, I think it's a very positive thing.
But we don't seem to have that in homes.
Right. Vast majority of loss of life, the vast majority of actual fire occurrence occurs in single-family dwellings, in homes, apartment complex, multifamily dwellings, places where we're most relaxed and most comfortable and most at ease, letting our guard down often. And so it's a tough situation because we're all very private. We all like to have our domain in which we are the kings and queens of our castles, and we don't want somebody else coming in and telling us what to do. But fundamentally, if you can establish a relationship with a fire provider and be able to invite them in and get advice from them, there's nothing punitive to that. If they come in and they find something that they want to help you with, you can prevent some of those fires and that loss of life. And personally, I think that's a great value for me as a homeowner with family and with grandkids in the house. I want to have that input. I want to have those individuals. And quite frankly, volunteer or paid, they welcome that opportunity. They would much rather be in there talking to you as you and I are talking now, as opposed to some opportunity for an emergency response. It just it helps everybody.
But are there do we have programs in place that actually will be coming around to check this, or do people resent that?
No, I think that there probably is a great deal of misconception about it. It may come to some resentment, but I think that, again, it's an education system and knowledge of who your local provider is. Here in the city, with a phone call, I'm sure you could schedule those things and they would come right out. In the county, you're going to make some contact with an individual who volunteers or works at those departments, or calling your county director here and being able to schedule something through the county office. They'll welcome that opportunity. I think that there are some models out there that exist in the Lakelands area, such as what Abbeville County is doing with their community paramedicine program, that are probably the models for the future of what's going to happen in a homeowner situation, where a provider of an emergency services comes into your home invited by you to help you screen and look for a number of risk reduction activities and things, whether that's trip hazards or smoke alarms, or whether that's just health screening in the case of what Abbeville County is doing, to try to lessen some of the call volume that exists for the demand on the system that exists, but also as a preventative measure. And I think that's the future of really how we're going to get into somebody's home and be able to help them, is the more holistic approach of helping you with everything that's in your lifestyle. A community risk reduction program is probably the best model that exists.
Well, I know that all of our fire departments here, I know where I live, they send out a letter every year, and they would like you to contribute. And we have the fire department that does the hash and the barbecue and all these different things. How do our fire departments that are not city, which get tax dollars, how did they survive?
Very difficultly, quite frankly. I think it's a very strong challenge that a leadership team, that management of those departments, a fire chief and or others, has to think about every year, is the demand of not only responding to emergencies, but being able to operate the business of a department, paying the bills, keeping the vehicles rolling, keeping tires on the vehicles, being able to maintain them in the constant ready position. So it's a very strong financial demand that exists. Some of those individuals, and you gave examples of how they can do things, are successful at that. Others struggle day in and day out to be able to maintain those things. And there's no real good model for it, because I think that when an individual or a group of individuals has to focus so much of their energy on fundraising activities, that a lot of the energy of those volunteers are therefore absorbed in doing those others, as opposed to being able to focus on preparedness and response. Goes back again to that successful model of a volunteer system that can incorporate any individual from the walks of life in their community, some of which can be doing those fundraisers while others are doing the emergency response. It's that blended model of that volunteer system.
One of the problems, though, it occurs to me, and we see this in all walks of, whether it's in our school system or whether firefighters, is that it seems to be a few are paying for the majority.
Sure.
That's a problem.
Sure. Whether you talk about the activity of individuals that are on a roster, or whether you're talking about those individuals in the community that are supporting it, yeah, I think that's probably the norm. That's really what happens around it. I think the challenge is to be able to market your organization, whether you're paid or volunteer, to be able to engage the people in your community about what your needs are and why. To be able to communicate, just not, hey, when you call 911, we come running, but fundamentally, what does it take to maintain that level of preparedness? And when you engage the individuals prior to an incident, I think they begin to appreciate that, and you get a little more buy-in. It becomes more of a community effort, I guess.
I would think if you realized how much it actually cost when they come out, that might make a difference.
Yeah.
If I had to call 911 and have them come out, how much is it actually going to, no, I'm not going to get a bill right then and there, but how much does it cost everybody?
You think about it now, if you're in a paid system, you've got not only the equipment that must be maintained and purchased, which is very expensive, you've got the individuals riding that apparatus, their salary and benefits, you've got the system back in the station that maintains that. That's an expensive endeavor. The same thing is true on the volunteer side. You've got those same level of expenses. You may not have the personnel salaries, but still their time that they have invested in that response and in preparation, there's an intangible that's there that it costs somebody. Maybe it's just out of their pockets to be able to attend and go and train and prepare, but there's still an incredible cost that goes along with it. Some of the reimbursement rates that the federal government uses would pretty much scare you, especially when you're talking about things of
They scare me every day.
Absolutely. It's a very tough thing that you're having to combat, those rates of cost. And so that's why I think that a good system is one which can engage you on a preventive level before that cost gets engaged. Is before we have to come here to this building to fight a fire, you and I are working out what we can do to prevent that from happening.
Sure. Well, I do remember here at Sharp Facets, it was maybe 7-8 years ago, our molding there started to fall in, and it had been there for years and years and years, but it started to fall in. Fire department came, first thing they wanted to do was cut off the power, and one of the firefighters was one of the last people to pull the last piece of jewelry out of the case before the whole thing fell. I mean, they were right here in the building. We actually were out of town in Florida, and these guys were just great. Wow. You know, because that molding that goes all around the center fell right into the center.
Again, part of the department's response is not just coming to fires.
Right.
A good fire department, a good emergency service organization is there for you as a taxpayer to do anything that they can do that day, that time, to make your life a little better. Now, that may be some odd things at times, that may be some routine things, but fundamentally it's about customer service, and you are the customer, you're the taxpayer. And again, successful organizations are those that adopt that attitude from the get-go. Volunteer paid, it's irrelevant, but adopt that attitude of service to where, hey, they've got a need, they've got a problem. What can we do to help this person and get them back on their feet, whether that's in business or get them back living in their house again?
Absolutely. Well, we are here with Joe Palmer. We will be right back. Don't you go away. We're going to be talking about some of the problems that some of our firefighters deal with, and we'll talk about maybe how you might like to get involved and how we can get more young people seeing it as a benefit to our community and to themselves. Hey, we'll be right back. That's right. We're right back here this afternoon. My very special guest is Joseph Palmer. He is the Executive State Director for the Firefighters Association. He spent pretty much, I guess we could say, a lifetime fighting, being involved in firefighting.
30 years. It doesn't seem that way. I mean,
30
it just
years.
look back and it just seems like yesterday. But yeah, 30 years have passed.
Yeah. So, and of course, you started out as a volunteer.
Yes, I did, right here in Greenwood County.
So, you have progressed the ranks, and you travel not only, I guess, to Washington, D.C., but around the state.
We're all over the country, and I think that's one of the things that we're very fortunate here in this state to have is an association that provides resources not only to local firefighters, but firefighters around the country. You were talking earlier about the firefighters in Arizona. We sent a team out to work with them when they were experiencing those line-of-duty deaths to help with the actual funeral arrangements and some of the behavioral health issues that were there. West Texas we were in, we've been a lot of different places around the country. We were in Wisconsin here a couple of weeks ago. So it's really nice to work in a system and to work with a group of people around our state that are, we said a while ago, paying it forward. I don't want to wear that out, but just fundamentally that's the case.
Sure. Well, you never know when we might need the help.
Exactly. We've experienced that.
Now, just out of curiosity, you have found that firefighters can suffer from PTSD, suicide rates, divorce rates. Why would they have these kind of problems, Joe?
What an individual in the emergency response community as a whole experiences is a lot of stress, a lot of stressors of what you're experiencing, what you're seeing, what you're being acclimated to, and those calls that you go to. The actual physical and mental stress of going from 0 to 60, being at home in bed or at sleep at night to in the midst of an emergency scene, with the knowledge of all that could go wrong and the necessity of preparing to make sure those things don't happen. creates a pretty stressful environment in the behavioral health community for emergency responders. And I think it's of late something that we've had to understand, that each of the firefighters have a file cabinet in their mind, and in that file cabinet are cards, going back to your and I card catalog system in the library now. In that file cabinet,
Back in the dark ages.
before computers. In that file cabinet are little cards, and each one of those cards represent a memory or a thought that you've had and that you've been to, and something you've seen and had to experience or had to do that's not natural. And eventually that card cabinet gets pretty full. That file just begins to build. And sometimes it's very difficult for you to process all of that. And you were saying a while ago the way the firemen are have to present themselves in some macho level, which is another problem within itself. We tend to treat our own behavioral health the same way. To be able to say, you got to tough it up. You got to live with that. That's just natural. It's not.
Suck it up, Buttercup.
And
there you go.
Not.
Yeah.
And so what we've done is we've overloaded that file cabinet. We've overloaded those files, and we're finding that more and more people that have experienced those things without some true peer ability to be able to discuss and deal with those things, without clinical assistance, we're losing firefighters, paid and volunteer, it doesn't matter. But we're losing individuals that are good individuals, and at a time when we can't afford to lose people.
So there is help out there, whether they're volunteer or paid?
Another wonderful aspect of our association is that we provide to all the firefighters in the state a behavioral health program that teaches a lot of stress indicators, recognition of those indicators, that prepares peers to be able to help you as a co-worker, to be able to recognize those signs and be able to work through it. And then also we partner with the Department of Mental Health in developing a lot of training programs and a lot of clinical network to be able to talk to individuals that are just experiencing some tough times. And we have been able to prevent some pretty tragic events from occurring, documented things, and as you alluded to, the stress that occurs in firefighters causes some pretty drastic rates of things like divorce, and also causes some pretty drastic rates of suicide in firefighters in South Carolina. And you don't read and hear and see about that very much, but it's prevalent, and so we have to strive to try to find a way to be able to handle it and manage it.
I have talked to General Livingston,
Yes.
head of the National Guard.
Yes, ma'am.
And I tell you what, that's one of the issues that they have spent a lot of time and money trying to make sure that the National Guard doesn't suffer from the same type of things that you're talking about. We put guys and gals in harm's way for long periods of time, and then expect them to come home and just be part of the family. It doesn't work that way.
I'm going to get up in the middle of the night from a volunteer system. I'm going to get out of my bed. I'm going to leave the supper table, and I'm going to go to a call that just really something tragic has occurred, and I'm going to be in my A game and be able to deal and help with that. And then immediately I'm going to go be able to turn that off and go back home to my other lifestyle. And whether that's a shift in a paid system or a volunteer responding to a call, it's a pretty difficult thing for an individual to be able to do mentally and physically. Sure. Sometimes. And so we've got to recognize that and be able to help those individuals through it. We don't want them to leave. We're not going to say that that's not ever going to occur, but how do we deal with it? How do we talk about it? How do we get through it?
Well, how do we prevent it from happening to begin with?
That would be nice, yes ma'am.
Right, to be able to have that. So
Yes.
I know that's they're very similar as far as the National Guard
Yes.
and firefighters. I
Yes,
believe police officers go
Absolutely.
through the same type of thing.
Yes.
We've talked about a lot about the different aspects of firefighters. We've talked about the fact that you need volunteers, paid volunteers, but it is something that we need. And one of the programs that I read about on your website was the Explorer Junior Firefighter program. Is that program, I guess, designed to help get young people interested?
One of the most captive audience groups that are most amenable to being able to volunteer and are interested in the emergency response community is a younger group of individuals, the 16, 17-year-olds who are aspiring to be part of the community, who are looking for an identity, and they're able to associate with the department either through a junior firefighter or an Explorer Post program. And those programs are incredibly successful in communities who are trying to recruit and retain individuals. And what we've been able to design in this state is a training program and a system which in career and technology centers we can train 16 and 17-year-olds to be certified firefighters such that when they turn 18 they're ready to go to work, quote unquote, whether that's in a volunteer or paid capacity.
Sure. Do we have a program like this here in Greenwood?
I know that there's a number of junior programs available that are around this area, outside of Greenwood as well too, that are very successful. And so what we're trying to do as an association is to get in all of the career technology centers to establish a program that we can help pay for, that we've got grant funding for gear, for physicals, for the actual training courses themselves, and we've been real successful in targeting areas that really need that base of volunteers that don't have it because of whatever reason may be. It's a great avenue. It is the future of gaining and retaining people.
Now, if somebody is interested in being a firefighter, what are the requirements?
Have a smile on your face, have a willingness to serve, have the ability to be able to devote some time to it. And I think that if you can combine those aspects, you found a good individual. You know, a fire service is going to teach you what you need to know technically, manipulatively, or cognitively. They're going to be able to teach you those things. They can't teach you to be a good person. They can't teach you to really bring that good integrity, the
compassion.
there. And so if you come at it with compassion and with that background and a willingness to serve, you'd be the perfect person to be a firefighter, paid or volunteer, either way.
And could really make a difference in their community.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And isn't that the ultimate payback of what we're after? Is just, yes, we've got to support ourselves, but fundamentally to the community, we're giving something back.
Sure. And when we look at the massive fires that particularly on the West Coast that they see, nobody wants to have that. So if you have some time that you could donate to firefighting, whatever capacity, this is the thing I think that is the big takeaway here today, Joe, is you don't have to be ready to go through the door and go into the fire, but there's a lot more to it.
You're the perfect advocate. I'm going to hire you. You can work for me. There's the message.
Yeah.
You're right.
So if you would, now, what should they do if they are interested, Joe?
You've got two great systems. You've got a county system here in Greenwood and a city system as well. I would encourage you to get in touch with either of those individuals, either the city fire department or through the county office of emergency preparedness here, and they'll be glad to put you in touch with the individuals, or call our office. We've got an 800 line, and what we do is we'll collect information and get it back to the department for which you would be best fitted.
All right. Hey, you know you're listening to WCRS right here in Greenwood. Joe, thanks so much for coming out here today.
Ma'am, I appreciate it. It's been fun. Thank you for doing
absolutely. You know, Joe Wilson, thanks for putting us together that day.
That's
there you go.
And his wife. That's right.
Yeah, that's right. Hey, that's going to do it for us. Bye-bye, everybody.